My name is Dorris Trupp, and my maiden name was Anderson. And I was from South Sioux City, Nebraska.
My name is Adam Richard Trupp. I was born and lived in Hastings, Nebraska.
I was adopted by Paul and Mildred Anderson a year later after I was born. So I lived in an orphanage for a year, and then I lived with them the rest of till I got married. Paulie, my dad, came to visit at the orphanage, and while he was in there, I ran over and I jumped on his lap, and he said, "We'll take her." Almost like I was for sale, but I don't think I was. I haven't been for sale since. So I think that's how it all began. But I did live there for a year at Florence Crittenden home that was in Sioux City, Iowa. While I was growing up, we lived in South Sioux City, Nebraska, and I just lived about 3 houses from my grandfather, who was my dad's dad. And so I would run down to his house, and because I was very independent, and it was very safe, and I don't know if they'd let them do that now, but anyway, I did run down there, and I go down there and I play cards with him, and I played cards quite a bit with my grandfather. And so I still love to play cards, play bridge, and bunco, and different card games, but I love bridge, and I think it's because I spent so much time with my dad playing cards.
Did you beat him?
And I beat him too sometimes, but maybe not when I was, 5 years old. I did start playing really early though, so I had plenty of time to learn how to play cards. Yeah. Oh, my dad drank coffee all the time, and he drank it with cream and sugar, so it was heavily laced with cream and sugar. And so he would pour some into a saucer and give it to me to drink. And so I started drinking coffee. Somebody said, "You drink a lot of coffee." And I said, "Oh, I know." They said, "When did you start?" And I said, "Well, when I was 5. They said, "You drank coffee since you were 5? And yes, I did, because he gave it to me in the saucer, a little bit or whatever, a saucer full. And I loved spending the time with my dad, and my grandfather too, playing cards. And I still love to play cards. Yes, I was very, very active in school, in the activities, and was a cheerleader in high school and college at the University of Nebraska, and would run around the edge of the field, and go and see all the people and meet them and say hello. And it was a fun time. One of our best hobbies is collecting antiques, and so we have gone all around doing that. We don't do so much now because we are in our home more all the time now, but we would go on the road and watch or go into the antique stores and see a lot of different antiques. Oh yeah, I started out really with I think there's a name for them, but they're blue and white pictures, and I think that pottery is made in Nebraska. But anyway, and blue and white pictures, and my very first one was of irises. But now I have them all over the top of my cupboard. And I've enjoyed, it's just been fun. It's been a neat hobby to have, because it wasn't anything that got me in trouble. I didn't steal the pictures. So, yes, and then I did start in there someplace hooking rugs, and so I drew the pictures of things that we had seen, and then hooked the picture of things that we saw. And that's fun, and I still have all those rugs, around, and that's fun. Well, yes, another time, it seems like people keep asking me to do things. I was teaching at a preschool, at a church preschool, the church that we went to. I was teaching at the preschool, and when we were coming in from recess, or it wasn't called recess then, but anyway, the out of doors, and he came running over and he said, "I have a question to ask you. Can I talk to you for just a second?" And I said, "Well, yeah, wait till I get these kids in." And anyway, he said, "Well, I'd like to know if you would be interested in taking a job at the church, because there's going to be a job in Christian education, and I think you could do that." And I said, well, because I was an educator. I mean, that was my background. But anyway, I said, well, I can give it a try. So that's what started. He just, caught me. But anyway, it was a nice place to work, and I was very familiar with the children there, because a lot of their parents went to that church, and it was a good place to be. And they were in the same neighborhood as this church was. So it was a good thing. Well, I remember our first day, but I don't remember first meeting. But we were in a class together at the University of Nebraska, and he sat up closer to the front, and I just sat a few rows behind him, but I sat in the front. And that's all I really remember about that, except that I enjoyed seeing him. And one time somebody said, "Well, who is that guy that is up in the front row?" And I said, "Well, I don't know, but he always winks at me." So I've gotten to know him through a wink and a smile.
Well, I just noticed her sitting in there, and it was, I think we met like twice a week. We didn't go every day. So I noticed her up there in front, and one day she looked back at me, and so I just gave her a little wink and a smile, and she looked back again, and I winked with my other eye. And then
because I said, "I don't know, I think he winks at me."
After class, I don't know who approached who, but asked her if she'd like to go out, and this was kind of funny. If she'd like to go out after class and drink beer. No, she asked me that, and I said, I don't drink beer, but how about we go to a movie? So we did. We could walk right off campus a couple of blocks and go to one of the main movie theaters in, now this was in Lincoln, Nebraska, at the University of Nebraska. So we'd go to class there, and then I'd walk her back up and check her into the Kyo house, and walk on down the street. I was in the Delta Tau Delta. I was a Delt there, and I'd walk down
and who was always at the door? Who was always at the door to see that we got in?
Yeah.
Do you remember Mother Dunham?
Yes, oh my goodness.
She's a big woman.
She was a real...
But she would meet me at the door, because can you imagine now they wouldn't have people meeting? Anyway, that's what she did.
Yep. We got married in June of 1956. I had a scholarship at Nebraska from the NROTC, Naval Reserve Officers Training Corps. And it was a full scholarship. And I even had a little stipend. I got $85 a month while I was on that, and that was enough to pay for all my expenses, including my rental at the Delt House.
Can you believe that?
So, but they had a rule there that if you got that scholarship, you could not get married before you got your commission. So we got our commission in June of '56, and so on the 24th of June of '56, we got married in South Sioux City, Nebraska. I selected naval aviation. I'm a naval aviator, and they can't take all of the aviators in June or July of that year because there are too many from those. There were 52 NROTC colleges plus the Naval Academy, so they had to send some of them to some, it was active duty, but it was just a stopping point before they went to Pensacola. So ours happened to be in Norfolk, Virginia, and I didn't have a car, but my dad was in the automobile repair business, and he loaned us his Cadillac to drive to Norfolk. So here we are checking into VP 56, was the patrol squadron, and they flew seaplanes. It was way back in the day. They flew seaplanes. And what was funny about that was, here was the officers' parking was by their hangar, and here were all these officers' cars, senior, and here was this ensign, newly commissioned, with his Cadillac. And that was kind of funny, but they got us a place to live. They were used to doing some of this, and so we lived with Emma Seeger, and she was the widow of a petty officer, chief petty officer in the Navy. I don't recall his name. They lived at 1620 Bayview Boulevard, which was not very far from the hangar where I had to drive over. So I would just drive over there, and we lived in an upstairs apartment that she had. And then I'd get up early in the morning and go in for muster, and I did some flying with them. It was kind of fun. It was different than I'd ever done before because it was a seaplane. And in fact, we took one run, went out to Bermuda, and then back. And that was over about a 5-day period. And that was just a good time.
I said, we need to talk to my parents first. This was in the older days. We asked our parents before we got married. And so Dick said, I'll talk to your dad. And so we went into the living room and sat down and told him that we wanted to get married, or he told him, and then tell him.
So I said to her dad, Paul Anderson, that I'd like to marry Jean. And I don't know if I said, I never called you Doris.
Doris Jean?
I called you Andy too.
Yeah.
So anyway, I'd like to marry Jean, and I said, so I'd like your permission. And he said, that's fine, and you've got her teeth.
I have to pay for
I
her
never
teeth.
understood what that meant, but
he just paid for a filling. But you know, I have really good teeth.
Well, the story behind that was that he did a lot of work for the dentist, who wasn't good at paying his bills. So Paul would work for the dentist, and then he'd I don't remember how he made that up, but he said that I had her teeth.
He had to pay for that.
Yeah. My father had this automobile repair business in Hastings, and what I can remember back there was that on Saturdays I used to be a gopher for his shop, and he had a little Ford pickup. As I remember, it was about a 1-ton truck. It was small for the day. It would be really small for today. Anyway, I would go from the shop. They would order a part from A.H. Jones Chrysler Dodge Plymouth and DeSoto dealership, which was about 3-4 blocks. And then I would get in the pickup, and I could just barely see through the steering wheel. And the police station was only 2 blocks from my dad's place. And so I drive this truck. I knew how to drive it really well. It had a clutch and a gear shift and so forth. Anyway, I would drive it over there to A.H. Jones, and of course the man in the parts department knew me, so he'd have, my dad would tell him what I was picking up, and he'd have it ready, and typically some of them were a little heavy, so they'd take the parts out and put them in the back of the pickup. But going over there, if I passed a police car, they would just kind of look the other way, and then I would go on over there. I didn't know really what was going on, but they were not, these smaller communities, I guess, did things like that. So Hastings at that time was about a little less than 15,000 people. And mind you, this is what's baffling about this even to me today. It was the fourth largest community in Nebraska. Of course, there was Omaha and then Lincoln. Grand Island was just 25 miles north of us at Hastings. Then there was Hastings, and I'm not sure where it went from there, but it was just a very, very small community. Anyway, I get the part, go back over to the shop and turn it in, and then they might have a need for some glass. So they'd call Decker Glass Company there, and Decker glass then was not curved, it was all flat. And it wasn't even, the windshields were not even broken in the middle. It was one slab of glass. And they would get that out, whatever features they had to have, and I would get that and take it back, and then they put it on a bench, and they had a pattern for every possible car that they might need to have to cut glass on, and they'd put that pattern on the glass, and then they had a glass cutter that they would put on that, and that would just scribe a little line right around the entire piece of glass, and then they would just tap it with the other end of the glass cutter, and it would just make a perfect cut, a 90-degree cut right there. And then that was scrap. Then they would take the glass that they just cut and put it in the frame, and then put that back on the car. Another thing that they did, my dad had a wrecker, and he would get a call from either the police department or the state highway patrol, Nebraska Highway Patrol, and at that time the main system was just the U.S. highways. Mind you, there were no interstates or anything fancy. In fact, some of them were as narrow as each driving lane might have 12 feet from the middle of the lane to the edge of the asphalt. Most of them were asphalt at that time. There was very little concrete. And so we were west on Highway 6, and this car had just gone, it wasn't in a wreck, it had just gone off the road. I think somebody was probably drinking a little bit much and went out in the field a ways. And so I would go out in the field and get fasten the cable onto the car, and we always put it on the spring shackle underneath, and so I was putting that on there. And for some reason, thank goodness, to this day I think of that spring shackle went closed just like that, just after I got my hand out. And it would have cut all 4 of my fingers off right here. I wouldn't have had a hand at the end of my arm. Well, if you think about that, an arm without a hand is pretty useless. Today, they have things that they're remarkable what they can do. But at that time, they had just put a stump on there, and that had been the end of it. So it was the only time I can remember I went charging back out of that field up to my dad, and I just chewed him out about that. And when he recognized what it was, why he apologized. But you know, it was just it was a close call.
You would not have been able to fly, would you have?
Oh, and honey, I wouldn't have been able to do anything.
Yeah.
Because
And it was his right hand too.
like I say, and it was my right hand, so I had to learn everything over with my left hand too.
Oh yes, yes.
Yeah,
He was a good piano player, very good.
I liked playing the piano. Enid Irwin was my piano teacher, and Enid was really good. She taught with a ruler and a little gruff voice, and the ruler was to smack your fingers if you weren't doing it right. My favorite song, and I can remember it to this day, was "The Flight of the Bumblebee" by the Russian composer Rachmaninoff, and I used to that was really hard to play because it sounded like the wings of the bee, so it went up and down and back up, and it was fast. Yeah, it was very fast, and I just loved that song. It was just for some reason I played other Bach and Rachmaninoff and other composers too, but that was my favorite. And then she had an annual recital for all of her students, and I played that, and I got an ovation for playing that.
My parents both had gone to college and got a teaching degree. Well, my dad taught for a little bit, and then he thought, and he painted in the summer, painted and papered houses, and he decided he made more money, not that it was a lot, but made more money painting and papering than teaching school, so he quit teaching and went to painting and papering all the time. But they had good jobs, they supported their families, and it was good. We were very fortunate, very blessed.
The record that you're talking about, I lettered in 3 sports: football, basketball, and track. And I always wanted to break in track. I ran the quarter mile and the half mile. And at that time, they were in yards. So a half mile was 880 yards and a quarter mile was 440 yards. And my hope was that I could break 10 seconds. I could break 2 minutes off of the half mile. And I ran that, and I went back to get the time, and it was 1 minute 59.5 seconds. So it was a half of a second from, and I still recall that today. Now today they don't, these were handheld stopwatches, and it was just how fast the man reacted and how he saw the angle and everything. I could have been over, but I was just a little less. At night, after a basketball game or something, some of us, I guess I was pretty active with all these shenanigans. But anyway, we'd get in an alley, and when cars went by on the street there, we had snowballs. They weren't ice, but we would throw them down there and just hit them for the fun of it. You know, I don't know what the people in the car would think, but anyway, we did that, and so we were doing that, and all of a sudden we realized that there was a police car behind us in the alley, and they got us all and they took us to the police station. And they were, I don't know what they thought, but anyway, they called and they thought I was Dick Hill. Yeah, because my good friend. And we did look a lot alike, but the policeman thought I was Dick Hill. So they called his dad, Dave Hill, to come down and get him and take him home. So I didn't know this until Dave showed up at the filling station and said, "Come on, Dick, we're going home." So he took me to my house, and I'm sure he told my folks what was going on. And the Eagle Scout thing was kind of interesting too. We went to the Methodist church in Hastings. It was and the scout number there was Troop 190, and then right down the street, one block, was the Presbyterian church, and their number was 200, Troop 200. So they made, a lot of people made Eagle Scout down there, and that was a big thing at the time. It's too bad what's happened to it now, but it's not the same. So I had to go and interview with the school superintendent, who was the chairman of the board for the scout troop over at Troop 200. And I can't remember that man's name, but he said, okay, he said, "Dick, I'll make you a deal. We'd like to have you come and be in Troop 200, but you have to promise me that you'll make Eagle Scout," because that was their big thing. And almost everybody that was in that troop made Eagle Scout. So I said, "Yes, sir, I can do that." So one of the things that they did in the summer, for a week, they went to Colorado, and we went up in the Cache-la-Poudre Canyon. You can recognize the French on that. We'd go up there and we would work on our badges. And one of the things we had to do, we had to go hiking on our own. Now remember, we're not that old, and we're up there in those, and we had to hike above the Mummy Range. Now that's above tree line. So at tree line, then there is no foliage above that. So there'd be about probably 8 or 10, probably 6 or 8 of us. They'd send several groups out. They didn't want a big mass of people. So we would go there and hike. And one of the things I can remember, this was in northern Colorado. One thing I can remember very, very clearly, and to this day I can still see these things. If we looked north, we could see the ice station at the Union Pacific Railroad in Laramie, Wyoming. And I can't remember the distance, but it must have been 60 miles. And then if we looked to the east, we could just see forever right out over the Great Plains. And the Forest Service guys up there knew what we were doing, and so they helped us with all this, and we'd use their mapping systems and stuff. And I made that one, which Morgan has. I made a plane table. That was part of a badge. And we would just sight down this thing and then just draw a line to get the bearing. And they had a big chart that was on the table. And we did this same thing in the Navy too. And then we would draw the line on there to get the bearing. And then we'd roll that up and put it in our backpack and hike back down. You could see, you didn't have any idea looking east how far you were looking, because there wasn't anything to represent the distance. But looking at the ice station in Laramie, it was, like I said, maybe 60 miles, so you'd know what that was. The map thing kind of transitions to the ship too, because every summer we had the 3 summers between the 4 years in college, we had to go on a 2-month cruise. And one of those summers, I can't remember, I think it was the 3rd one, was navigation. And we had we would shoot at stars, and we used a sextant to shoot, a brass sextant to shoot. And I've always wished I had one of those sextants because I love brass, and I don't have one, but we would run this sextant up and get the angle, and then we'd look in the Bowditch publication, which had all of those angles, and it was a huge, thick book. I mean, it was unreal. So we'd have to find the page and everything, and the goal was you had to shoot 3 of those. So you could have 3 spots. You had to get the point under the eraser on a pencil, or it wouldn't count. In the Navy, they had several different designations for flight abilities, and a green card pilot was a instrument rated pilot who could sign his own flight plan.
Which is a big
So,
deal. Which is a big deal. I mean,
yeah, which was a big deal, and I made the decision long before that I should get all of the things that I could. Being a professional aviator, if you're flying in a service, you got to be professional. That I should have that. Some people didn't care, but I did. So I did the work to get that, and I can remember one time I got myself behind the 8 ball really bad. Obviously you can see I survived, but what happened was I was at the Naval Aircraft Torpedo Unit, and was flying a cross-country flight. Commander Van Oss was our CO, and he let me do this. Nebraska was playing Oklahoma in Lincoln on that Saturday, so he let me have the day off on Friday, and then I'd fly out there Saturday and come back on Saturday. So I was flying out there, and on the way out I stopped at Bunker Hill Air Force Base, and this will sound funny to you, but that was in northern Indiana, but that was the name of the base. And so I landed there for fuel and refiled my flight plan for Lincoln Air Force Base, Lincoln, Nebraska. So we went there, and while we were in the air going there, there was a message came on the guard channel. Every aircraft had a guard channel on it, and it would overcome all of the other transmissions, and that's the only thing. You could just hear it. And they overcame the transmission, and it was about the assassination of President Kennedy in Dallas, Texas, had just happened. And so, we listened to that, and then I thought, well, they're going to cancel that football game. They won't have a football game the day after something like that happened. But they decided to go ahead and have the game. So we went into Lincoln, and my parents picked me up. I don't know what the other fellow flying with me was doing, but we met back to come to return. And so we came back to Lincoln, fueled up, left, and I'm watching my fuel consumption, and the weather was CAVU, which was our term for ceiling and visibility unlimited. And you could, again, from altitude, you could see a long distance. So I had filed a flight plan to Columbus, Ohio, which I think it was just Columbus Air Force Base at that time, to refuel going back. But we had a tailwind, so we were making pretty good fuel consumption. So we got pretty close there, and I had enough reserve, and everything looked good. I'd been checking it all the way. And so I called air traffic control and told them I was refiling my flight plan to Quonset Point, Rhode Island. And so they cleared me. And the big mistake that I had made, that was a real good lesson, I'm here to tell it, was that the wind shifts. And instead of having a tailwind, which was helping me along, I now had a headwind, which was slowing me down and increasing the fuel consumption. So I could see that was happening, and I'm coming into across those states there, and Connecticut and on into Rhode Island, and I could see that it was going to be just close. So I declared an emergency. I called air traffic control, which passed it on to the flight tower at Quonset, and they still had real good weather. So they didn't have any choice. I was up there. I was going to come down one way or another. So I made this landing and taxied on back to the, boy, you can believe I breathed a sigh of relief on that. I taxied back to the Naval Aircraft Torpedo Unit, and the fuel truck came up. The men that were recovering the flight there were two of them, were on the top taking the fuel with the fuel gauges. And what they did to check it was they had a wooden rod with measured, and they would drop that, they'd hold on to it, but they'd put that down in the tank and see how much fuel was left in the tank. And I can remember those guys up there, they were terrific sailors. And they looked at that, they looked at each other, and then they looked at me, and I knew exactly what they were thinking. You know, how in the heck did he do that? And so I gave him a thumbs up and jumped off and went over and closed out my flight plan and went home and took a deep breath. Yeah, that was too close.
That's scary.
Yeah, but it was, it was very, very scary. I can remember making that final turn on my approach, just hoping, that it wouldn't happen there, and I'd have to make I could make a gliding landing if I was close enough, but if I wasn't close enough, I still would have crashed short of the runway. That wouldn't have been good. I flew helicopters, and one I can remember very clearly again was, we were in the Mediterranean. I was on board the USS Shangri-La, and we were in the eastern Mediterranean, and I got a call in my room. I had a detachment on board there. I got a call in the room, and the bosun's mate of the watch up on the bridge said, "Mr. Trupp, the captain would like to see you on the bridge." Well, that's an order. So I said, aye, aye. So I got my flight gear, and I made my way up to the bridge. and it's dark 30, and it's the windshield wipers are going on the bridge and everything, and the captain is standing there, and he said, we have a message that a Greek ferry has capsized in the Aegean Sea, and they want us to go there and see if there are any people that can be recovered. Well, we couldn't recover maybe 2 people because we just had a small helicopter, and they were famous for overloading their ferries to go from one island to another, and they were flat-bottom ferries, and any kind of a sea state, they would just capsize. And of course everybody would be thrown in the water, and they all drowned and went to the bottom. So I looked at the captain, and he looked at me, and he knew what I was thinking, and I knew what he was thinking. And there were 2 kinds of missions that we flew there. One was tactical, and the other, I just called the other one a political. We didn't call it that. That was just my name for it. The second one, this was a political mission because it was from the State Department, and they wanted us to do that just to show the Greeks that we were out there and we were protecting them. So I looked at that, and the captain said, told me all that. And so here this is coming from the very top down the chain of command, and who's making the final decision but the lowest ranking officer in the whole chain, me. So I said, yes sir, we can fly over there and take a look at it and see what we think of it. So I went back down on the flight deck where they were ready with the aircraft, and I had a co-pilot. The helicopter, the aircraft commander was in the right seat, the starboard side, and I had, it was Fred Alcott, Gene. I had Fred on the port side, and then there was the man in the down below in the cabin, or just behind us in the cabin, was a first-class petty officer named Tiedemann. So I went down and I said, now Tiedemann, here's what we're going to do. I want you to get in that seat over there. I want you to put that seat belt on, and I don't even want you to think about jumping out to save somebody. And he said, aye, aye, sir. That means he understood exactly what I wanted him to do, because the sea state was, there were about 15 to 18 foot waves coming in there, and getting down in that, if one of those waves would hit us, of course that'd keep us in there too, and so I had to stay above that. So I watched, we got out there, and we did have lights that we could turn on underneath, but we were flying on the instruments. It was a total instrument flight, and so Tiedemann is down there, and Tiedemann and Alcott said, we don't see anybody. We don't see any debris or anything at all. So we reported that back to the ship, and so they said, return to station. So we turned back and headed. They said, we're going to close the range so it won't be quite as far back as it was out. So we flew back there and came around and made our approach and landed. And I went up to the bridge to report to the captain about it. And the captain's name was Hope Strong. Strong. It was an unusual name, Hope Strong. And so the captain said, well done, Dick. He said, you go ahead and hit the sack, and I won't call you again today. So I said, yes, sir, aye, sir. So I went back down and hit the sack. I was never so glad to get back as I was that night. When you're out over the ocean like that, there is no reflected light from anything on land, and so it is just total blackness. You can't see anything like this. We could see in the cockpit, but you couldn't see anything if you were walking or on the flight deck or anything.
Right.
Those guys didn't know what we were doing either.
Mm-hmm. So you also refused to throw someone in water?
Yeah, that's what I told Tiedemann, because he was like a rescue swimmer. If he saw somebody down there, he'd jump out. Well, he could have jumped out and we were at 60 feet. I mean, that would have killed him when he hit the water. I mean, he'd have just, I'd have lost him, and we wouldn't have known if there was anything, and I wouldn't have traded his life for anybody's. Well, that was in HS-11. It was a helicopter anti-submarine aircraft, and where was I going? We had I'd had to shoot you back then if I told you this, but I think probably it's long forgotten now. We carried a nuclear weapon on the helicopter on the right, on the starboard rack, and if we thought we had a target out there, they would send us on the bearing of the target, and then when we got to where we thought the submarine was, we would discharge that depth charge off the rack. Now it wouldn't arm itself till it had gone some feet below the surface. But then what we had to do was we had to turn downwind as fast as we could and go as fast as the aircraft would fly. And that aircraft would fly about 150 knots top speed. So you'd pitch it up to that speed, hoping that you could get out of the overburden. Because when that charge went off, it would come through the surface of the water, and then we knew we couldn't make it. We were coming back from northern Florida. I can't think of the name of the town, Jacksonville. There was a naval air station at Jacksonville, and to get aboard ship, we had to go from Quonset Point all the way down there, and return. So we were going back on the flight back, and we would fly a three aircraft formation, and we're over northeastern Georgia, northeast of Savannah, and I was flying again. I was in the pilot's seat, or on the right starboard side, and all of a sudden the aircraft that we were following was just below us here. All of a sudden its nose pitched up, and it kept coming up, and I thought we might get hit, but we didn't, and then it nosed straight down and went into a swamp there. And when it went into the swamp, of course, it burst into flame, and everything on it burned except for the casing of the engine. It did not burn, the rest of it did. So I called Mayday, Mayday, Mayday to the tower at Savannah, and gave them the bearing and the distance to where we were. And so they told me to remain on site until they could, for some reason. And then the other two aircraft went into the Air Force Base at Savannah. And there were 3 guys on there, and of course they were all, we knew them well, and the operations officer was the senior officer on there, and of course they couldn't survive that. We were flying probably at 500 or 600 feet, so all we'd fly, and then we got back in the aircraft and flew on. And that was pretty hard to do.
So while Dick was on all this these missions, I was home with the with the family, and I had 4 children while he was in the Navy. We started with Adam, Richard, that we call Rick, Trupp. He was born in '57, I think, and '57, and he anyway, and then we had Rebecca Jean, and she was born in '59, and let's see. But then 7 years, then we weren't going to have any more children. We thought, and then we decided they're so much fun. We enjoyed them so much. We really did, and we had 2 more. We had Robert Trupp, who's now a veterinarian in Scottsdale, up Arizona, and David, who coached football at a college level anyway, and so I was busy at home too, but doing different things, taking care of the family. The children were raised in Rhode Island and New Jersey, and as I said, there was 7 years between Rebecca Jean and then Robert Paul, and then we after we did that, we decided that they were getting older and older, and Dick said, I'm missing a lot of their life, and he said he really wanted to get out of the Navy because he missed the children, missed seeing them. So he did after 12 years, right? I think it was, yeah. Anyway, and but we loved our time in the Navy, but we loved getting out, and we went back to. We raised them in Rhode Island and New Jersey, but then we went back to. They said, well, we'll give you a job, or give him a job, someplace close to Kansas or to Nebraska, and so there was one in Kansas, and so we came back to live in Kansas so that we could see our family, our parents and our children back this way. And we've been glad, we've enjoyed it, and it's been good.
Well, I went to, in Washington, D.C., I interviewed a manager down there. He interviewed me to work for IBM. And he said, well, Dick, he said, we're going to hire you, but you have to have the manager where you're going to work interview you. And I said, okay. And he said, you go to lunch with Bud here, and when you come back, I'll have. And he said, where would you like to go? And I said, well, I thought I'd just be here. And he said, oh no. He said, we can call somebody else too. So I said, well, I'd like to live out in the Midwest. And he said, well, could you be a little more definite than that? That's somewhere between the Mississippi River and the Rocky Mountains, and we have a lot of people out there. And I said, well, I guess I started out in Nebraska, so someplace in that vicinity. So when we went back up there, he said, I talked to Roger Mercer in Topeka, Kansas, and he would like to have you come out and he'd interview you for a job he has there. I had to go out there and talk to him. So at the time we lived in Toms River, New Jersey. And the airlines, if you flew in uniform, the airlines would give you a half, it just cost half as much to fly. So I went up from Toms River to New York and flew to Kansas City. And at that time, Kansas City International Airport didn't exist. They landed downtown, and there was an IBM rep that met me there, and he came and got me, and they didn't see many people in Navy uniforms out there. So he took me to the drum room at the President Hotel, which was across the street from the IBM office. And we went in there, and it was they were in there having some kind of a meeting, and they all kind of looked funny. There was this guy dressed up like that. So we had a bite to eat, and I talked to Mercer, and then I found out later one reason why IBM's offices were divided up into different professional activities. And the IBM office in Topeka covered schools and hospitals and all federal government installations in a big area. Well, having the background I had with the Navy, he thought that would fit the federal requirement really well, which it did, and I enjoyed that. And I called on federal places there all the way from the federal prison at Leavenworth, which was famous. The Navy had an officers training school there, which I did. And then, there were several other important things like that that were military, where I fitted right in. I had a secret clearance flying, so when I was over there and I was at where they were training some officers, they would invite me to come and sit in the auditorium and listen to the presentation, which was secret, and they didn't have to shoot me when I went out, but it was very interesting, and I really enjoyed it. I made some good friends with some of those managers, those officers in those various locations. What Becky was talking about there was
that you volunteer at.
The museum was a military aviation museum, combat air museum, and we just called it CAM. And we had in our exhibits out there, we had, they were all military aircraft. Some of them had a civilian version too, but the Navy and the Air Force and the Army had all taken some of those and configured them to fly their missions. So I called it my tree house because it was something to do when I was retired. So I was a director out there at the time, and that helped a lot because I knew a lot of people in town to raise money and to get, I knew a lot of people, different places to get exhibits. So there was an exhibit out there, the Trupp Gallery, which show my time working for the Combat Air Museum. And there are some models.
Which is a whole room.
It has my flight gear from my Navy time, which I had at home. I just donated out there, and they put that in. My very good close friend Stu Ents did all that and put that all together. And there's a section of the museum, the Dick Trupp Gallery. And I raised funds in town I have no idea, but several millions of dollars. And one of my best successes there was Bob Dole was a senator from Kansas, from Russell, Kansas. So one day it occurred to me that I ought to call his office in Topeka and see if he could come out and visit the Combat Air Museum and you know, just as an interest, and we'd let people in the community know, and maybe people would come out. So he called back and he said, Senator Dole said he would like very much to come. When would you like him? And I thought, oh my goodness. I said, well, any time that's convenient for him. So we worked on it and got a time. And of course it came with his entourage, you know, and of course he was wounded. He was wounded at Casino when he was with the 10th Mountain Division. So the man and he didn't go in a wheelchair, he walked. So but the man that was behind him, you know, had a hold of his belt, holding him up, and Dole's walking up there, and he always had a pen in his wounded hand, and so he extended his other hand, and I knew that, and so he shook hands, and we went in, and he sat there, and we had a lot of people that knew he was coming came that day and came to the museum, and he'd autographed their brochure, and that was really a wonderful thing. And then he came back again later and did the same thing. So he liked coming back to Russell. Of course, some of that was politics too. Yeah, it was very special. And that museum was special.
And it was,
to think of some other.
and that museum is special to you too,
Well,
very
it's
much
still
so.
special because I still keep in touch with them with their newsletter. Yeah, we used to take Adam was our first grandson, first grandchild, and when I retired from IBM, I had met a fellow there working with him, and he had a travel business. I can't think of the name of it right now. Something tours. Anyway, we made a lot of tours in the Midwest, and Colorado was one of a lot of interest for a lot of people. So we would go there, and we were making this one trip, and we're driving along, and all of a sudden I'm up in front with the driver. There was always a seat there for the tour guide. I'm up there, and all of a sudden I heard, "Nana, you're cheating." And the people in the bus all laughed, you know. Well, Adam, they were playing some game back there, and he just said that, and everybody got a big kick out of that. The other thing,
I wasn't cheating.
the other thing with him, we always had a room reserved for us, and so Adam stayed in there with us too. And he was a real pusher, and so he pushed me out of bed one night. I had to go around and get in the other side. That was funny. I remember him just scooching up there, and he was probably, it's a good thing morning came when it did, or he'd have come out of bed too. On one of those trips, we went to the Grand Canyon, and we went through that part of the canyon and everything, and then we went up to the Glen Canyon when they were making the Glen Canyon Dam, which was back in the day. and we're up on the deck of the hotel, just looking out toward the west. And there was a beautiful thunderstorm out there with cloud-to-ground lightning and the whole picture. And I can remember just being amazed by what that looked like across that countryside. So we went on from there to Four Corners, and stood in all 4 states at the same time. People could take their pictures. And then we came back through Colorado and headed on back to Topeka. But that was a good time. Oliver Tours.
Phil Oliver.
Huh?
Phil Oliver was
Phil
his.
Oliver Tours. That was the name of the owner of that little company. So we went to the Sandhill Cranes. It's a famous migration. It's world famous. It's one of the top 10 in the world for natural animal, if you will. They're cranes. And these are Sandhill cranes, and they come up through Kansas and Nebraska. And then when they're going through Nebraska, they cut into an hourglass kind of a shape between Grand Island and Kearney, Nebraska. And the reason for that is that they roost at night in the river, because if they didn't roost in trees, but they had to roost when the foxes and other animals wouldn't attack them at night. So they roost in the river, and then in the morning, real early, they would come out of the river and start their trip on north through Nebraska and South Dakota on into Canada. And then up there they would come back down around, typically on the west side of the Pacific Ocean. And the crane was, I'm trying to think what it was. It was kind of a religious animal, bird for the Japanese at that time. And they'd come back down, and then the next year a group would form and they'd do the same thing. And they were, there was always a pair of them. And if one went down on the way anywhere, the other one would stay until they were pretty sure the one on the ground had died, and then it would come and catch up with the other ones. It was a real, it was just a wonderful story about animal life.
Animal behavior that really we should follow too, some of it.
Yeah. It was a lot of fun to do that. And then the one with David to Normandy, we went over there, and this wasn't with the travel agency. We did this on our own. We'd rent a car and go from place to place. And one place we wanted to go was Omaha Beach at Normandy.
My maiden name was Anderson, and so my family came from Sweden, and they came across the ocean to
Ellis Island.
What?
Ellis Island.
Ellis Island. They came through on Ellis Island. When Becky Dick sent us or let us go on a trip to Sweden, and when we were pulling around in this big ship, the tears just started coming down my face, and I didn't know I was going to do that, but just because it had been talked about so much growing up, and I had never been there, so it was fun to go to Sweden. Yeah, well, just last night, as we were tucked ourselves in, we said goodnight to each other, and I said, let's say a prayer, and we did, and we thank God for all the many, many blessings that we've had in our life, and many, 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 and that we're so blessed to have had them and had each other.
And one of those blessings is Becky.
It is for sure. One of our greatest blessings is Becky. So we're just very thankful to have crossed the plains this way. No, but we've had a good life. And we are having a good life right now, even. Yes, we have. We have 4 of our children, and so then now we have. How many was it? 12. 12 altogether, because they have mates or marriage partners, and now they have children, and there's 4 great grandchildren that we have. And can you believe it? All that's happened in our lifetime. But we have been very, very blessed, and we're very, very fortunate. And we thank God for everything that we have, especially the kiddos. My favorite part of being a parent was just having good nights with them. I mean, when we put them to bed and kissing them, that's one of my favorite parts. But kissing them goodbye when they go off to school, and just being with the kids. I love being with the kids. That was good. Love one another, love each other, care for each other, and put your mate.
Don't go to bed.
Yes, and don't go to bed without making up if you have had a disagreement. But just go to bed being happy with each other and with your family.
My name is Dick Trupp.
And my name is Jean Anderson Trupp, and this is our legacy.